So today is May 29th. I'm Patricia Schechter, and we have Portland State University students interviewing the History of CR history project. And we are going to be interviewing Barb Tint, a faculty member. And we're going to introduce the interviewers and then begin with a round of questions. Let's see. Steph, why don't you go first, since we'll come back around to you.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I am a first year grad student in the public history program. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you. And Alex Ibarra?
Hi, Alex Ibarra. I'm a first year grad student in public history and Chicano history. Really nice to meet you.
Fabulous. Jake, go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Jake Hutchins. I'm a graduate student in public history. Looking forward to the interview.
Alex Berg.
Hey, I'm Alex. I'm an undergraduate student in history.
Thank you. And Oona.
Hi, I'm Oona Fisher-Campbell. I'm a graduate student in public history.
Liza Shea.
Hi, I'm Liza. I'm also a graduate student in public history, and I'm extremely jealous that you're at the beach right now.
And then you can see some other familiar faces, Barb. Cleophas Chambliss is here. You want to say hello, CC?
Hi, Cleophas Chambliss. I'm the videographer on this program, on this project, but I'm also a conflict resolution student, and hopefully a peace studies grad student in the future.
Yay, thank you. And Lady J is here. Say hello. Welcome.
Hi. I'm also in grad school, but at a different school, and I'm officially halfway through my communications program.
Fantastic. Thank you, and just welcome everybody, and thank you again, Barb, for being with us today. I'm so appreciative of your time. So we'll go back around the horn to Stephanie with our first question, and I'm gonna mute.
Great. Hi again, Barb. So as Patricia said, we've now heard from 9 individuals, and one of the most fascinating things I think that we've all heard is how each person came to the field of conflict resolution as well as the actual program. So I'm curious to know what drew you to the field of conflict resolution.
Okay. Well, like many things, sometimes in life, it was a bit of a happy accident. I'm just going to move as I'm talking. I was a practicing psychologist. I was a clinical psychologist at Reed College, actually, and doing a lot of social and political work on the side, and kind of knew I was antsy to be doing something else, that clinical work was no longer really the work I felt called to do. My daughter was 4 years old at the time, and I wanted to go live abroad before she started school. Nobody wanted to pay me to live on a beach and learn a language. I don't know, go figure. And a very, very long story short, I went to a lecture one night to see Oscar Arias speak at Reed, he was the former president of Costa Rica, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize for demilitarizing Central America, and he had used all the Nobel Peace Prize money to start a foundation for peace and human rights in Costa Rica. And you know, some bells went off, and I just kind of knew that was what I was called to do. And at the time I was also looking for that, what am I going to do if I take a year off? And I ended up, again, somewhat accidentally, with a fellowship to study abroad, and I ended up starting my PhD in international conflict resolution at the University of Melbourne in Australia. And the rest is, I guess, as you would say, history.
Thank you. I wonder if you would be willing to share a bit more about I think we've heard a lot of language around being called as well as happy accidents. And there is some, I don't know what the word is, maybe like synergy there. I was wondering if you could speak more about what was missing in your work as a clinical psychologist that you felt needed to be filled by something else, even if you didn't know what it was.
Right. I mean, I think it's a personal thing for everybody, is where you feel alive and where you feel less alive. Being a kind of a clinical therapist was, to a large degree, very passive, sitting and listening all day long, and very heavy work. Not that the work I do now isn't heavy. So I think I always knew I would enjoy teaching and facilitating and working in dynamic group processes more than being kind of one-on-one. And I felt the micro of individual problems was not what I was most passionate about. I mean, I was good and I helped people, but I was more drawn to the social political issues facing our world. And, you know, even when I worked with people individually, I always had that lens on. So I was happy to be able to shift my lens in that direction. And when I got to Australia, again, I had no idea that this was a thing. And when I got there, there's a group of peace psychologists that meet every 2 years somewhere around the world. And the year I went to Australia, Melbourne, where I was being hosted and doing my PhD, was the one hosting that meeting. So I got to Melbourne and I met 50 it's an invited only symposium, 50 people from all around the world who called themselves peace psychologists. So they were psychologists, but using that discipline to look at issues of peace and conflict and violence. So, you know, it was a thing and I didn't know it. And there I was in its lap, you know. So I was very lucky.
Thank you. I hope I don't hope I don't step on anyone else's toes, because there is something that you mentioned there that is really interesting to me about the relationship between the individual nature of what you were doing and the sort of larger scope. And we've heard a little bit about that even within the department. Could you speak a little bit more to the relationship between conflict resolution on an individual scale versus sort of the international lens, the broader lens?
Sure. Well, I mean, the micro and the macro are connected, obviously, and any individual is living out the stories that they've been a part of. So, you know, the women in my individual practice who were struggling with eating disorders, you know, were struggling with issues related to gender and all the things that came along. You know, people of color in my practice were struggling with internalized oppression. I mean, I don't know that we named it as such at the time, but that's clearly what it is. Or class issues, or, you know, all kinds of issues. I mean, we are all walking the stories that we've been in and that we've been told and that society is told about us. So a lot of that is not always in people's awareness. It's in some people's awareness more than others. And I'm not sure that my lens at the time that I was doing clinical work was fully attuned. But I was always interested in systemic issues. So even as a clinician, I had done a lot of systems training, family therapy training, intergenerational issues. So looking at systems of which we are a part. So we could be part of a family system, we could be part of a community system, we can be part of a social system, we could be part of a political system. But at the end of the day, none of us are individuals without being part of the systems that have informed our life experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Alex Ibarra.
Hi. So you've talked a lot about how you've done various different aspects of conflict resolution, working with the different systems of oppression. In your experience, do you feel, having worked on all these different areas, that there's a difference between conflict resolution and peace? That these two different sort of categories, are they separate or are they together in your mind?
Well, they're connected. And, you know, again, I think a lot of it depends on how you define these things, right? Which I'm guessing you've spent some time doing.
How would you
You know,
define?
even the language, I mean, there's conflict management, conflict resolution, conflict transformation, peace studies, peace research. There's all kinds of things, right? So conflict resolution is dealing probably more with the micro, whether it's interpersonal or intergroup. Conflict transformation tends to be more looking at the systems and the structures that we're in. Peace, you know, there's negative peace, there's positive peace. Yeah, I mean, I think if your question is, are they connected? I would say yes, of course. I can't hear you.
Unmute, Alex. Unmute.
Give me one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, it froze on my end. I was trying to say, can you elaborate a little bit on what your definition of negative and positive peace is?
Well, you know, this comes from Galtung, Johann Galtung, who was one of our foundational scholars and thinkers in the field. Negative peace is the cessation of direct violence. So if people stop killing each other, we no longer have wars, we no longer have direct violence, then it's negative peace. But positive peace is negative peace is a part of positive peace. You can't have positive peace without negative peace, but you can have negative peace without positive peace. So positive peace also includes, you know, structures of oppression and violence are replaced by structures of equity, and it's addressing, you know, environmental degradation and economic inequity and issues of poverty and issues of race and issues of patriarchy. So, you know, if we have no more direct violence in the world, but we still have the structural violence where people are dying every day from preventable disease, or people are dying from, you know, unjust racial laws, then we don't have positive peace. So that's traditionally how those two concepts are thought of.
Thank you.
Jake, go right ahead when you're ready.
All right. So Barb, something we've been trying to capture with this project is addressing what it is that the conflict resolution program itself was attempting to address when it was formed. So I guess the best way we found to put that is, if conflict resolution was the answer to something, then what was your sense of what the question was when conflict resolution was being formed?
Right. Well, I'm sure you've heard from others that the name went through a few iterations, and it was actually going to be peace and conflict resolution, and the word peace was taken out because I think it was kind of a hot button at the time, as we were, I believe, kind of either just during or just post Iraq 1. And so we were trying to get into the university and trying not to be controversial. So that was a decision that was made at that time. I think, you know, Rob Gould, who was our core founder, had a very strong kind of peace activism background. So I think it was the language of the time. I think conflict resolution was seen as a new growing discipline. And I think it was a language that was used to be much more umbrella than it might be seen as now, to deal with issues of conflict, war, violence, all of it. I mean, I think the goal was to address the micro and the macro, as well as the practical, as well as the theoretical, as well as the activist dimension.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because one thing that we've had come up multiple times over the course of this project is this sort of pivot point around the Gulf War and how it impacted the development of the program. But we've received varying degrees of answer on the relevance of it. And I was wondering if you could sort of unpack, if you would, why exactly you think it was so controversial, or how the Gulf War created this issue of using the language of peace in the development of the program.
Well, I wasn't around for that exact decision. I was kind of the third one in the door. So Rob and Mary co-founded, and I came in like a year or two later. I think it was, I'm not sure, but my guess is, universities are not attempting to be political. So I think the goal was to create a program that wasn't going to, hit those hot buttons of being too political, right? So if we were seen as sort of advocating for peace at a time that our country was at war, it could clearly have been seen as sort of more of a political agenda, but who could have a problem with conflict resolution?
Well, that's interesting, because it seems that separating peace, either micro or macro, but especially macro, would be a difficult thing to separate from politics.
Well, it's not that we weren't perfectly happy to acknowledge that we were going to be discussing politics, but we had to be seen as not having a particular political agenda, right? And, conflict resolution is not value free. It's not. So, but I think a lot of it is, it's also university politics. What's going to open the door? What's going to close the door? And I think a decision was made at the time. Again, I wasn't part of that decision, but my understanding is that was a lot of it. But I think, Rob and Mary would have the skinny on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Alex. Berg.
Yeah, so that was kind of a lovely discussion on like the macro of conflict resolution, or the purpose of conflict resolution and how it came to be. Could you maybe say a few words about your sense of how it might have either answered or met student demands or interests on campus? So specifically how it fit into the fabric of PSU campus and what the students were kind of wanting at the time in terms of conflict resolution?
Well, at the time, as we started as a master's degree only, which was the trend in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So we were seen as very interdisciplinary. We were in the philosophy department.
Mm-hmm.
So, Rob was a philosopher. I was a psychologist. Mary actually had a PhD in interdisciplinary conflict resolution. We had sociologists, political scientists. So we were very interdisciplinary, which was, I think, an advantage to be able to reach a wide variety of students. We offered classes that really, again, met the spectrum of all kinds of things. So, my very first class was psychology of conflict resolution, and I taught it at both the micro and the macro, so that students who were interested in figuring out how to be better at work were getting what they needed, and students who wanted to be dealing with issues of global war and peace were getting what they needed. So a lot of the classes transcended both the micro and the macro. And I think just the concept of conflict resolution had a broad appeal, because most people would like to be better at this practice. It was new, it was cutting edge. In not very long, we were the biggest program on the West Coast. And so, bless you. So I think it was also good timing. I think the world was ready for more of this. And again, the field was growing in this way. So we hadn't been an active academic discipline much prior to that, so we were early adopters, I guess you could say.
Do you see a connection or a fit with the conflict resolution program and student anti-war activism, which might be considered kind of out of the, or outside of the academic mainstream or kind of adjacent to it. Do you see a connection there?
Well, of course. And again, as an interdisciplinary faculty, all of us have our different orientations. So Tom Hastings lives very heavily in the world of activism and very clearly, transparently in the world of nonviolence. And that's his practice. And I would say it's not separate from academia. You know, the field of nonviolence and the field of activism are supported by theory, and they're supported by you know, engaged scholarship, and they're supported by rhetoric. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which that intersects with multiple academic arenas. So even though people are on the street, it doesn't mean that it's not informed by good academic thought and scholarship. And, you know, again, that's, everybody in our department has a bit of a different focus and a different orientation. So the students who are really driven by that, you know, are going to find Tom.
I believe it's me next, right?
I just have to do a public service announcement. I mean, every history project, every research project, as we know, is shaped by its own moment. And Barb, you just know that we've been doing, this is our moment, right? We in terms of our buzz about our own campus or our own understanding of our campus, I think this group, but including me, has been sort of refocused on narratives about PSU as an activist campus or students as mobilized and very globally conscious. So that's, I think, so that's a boiling and slow bubbling in our inquiry this term in a way that it might not have had this, you know, bright red, you know, issue not come out in the last month. So that's a little of our own context. So.
But I don't think I've seen that. So.
Well, one of the things about this was the student strike at Portland State in 1970 in protest of the Kent State killing. Yeah. And then the violence, again, there was a peaceful encampment, and then it was sort of called off. And as the breaking down the camp, the police got very aggressive, and there were some injuries and a melee. And then there was a protest at City Hall and subsequent against the violence. And there's a beautiful documentary film that the students shot at the time. And there's much to say about this moment, not the least of which it's the 50th anniversary of this event on our campus this exact year. A, and B, Rob is not in here as someone who had been a draft counselor in the, you know, for years on campus. So against this part of what we're trying to do is fill some of those silences and gauge, as you say, people live with that story that they're told or that they're given or that they read in a textbook, and then we come back and we dig a little deeper. So that was a very long public service announcement, so I apologize.
Well, the magazine is probably sitting in my mailbox at campus. So.
It's also online.
Okay.
Because it's a pandemic. And then
and it's the name of it is?
This is the PSU sort of alumni magazine.
Oh, okay.
So if you go to UCOM, you can find it. And I think, I won't speak for everybody, but I think we were very taken with the video, that the documentary that the students made. It's just haunting, and the grainy black and white, it just takes you right back in time. So it's very powerful. And just so you know, that it's going to be good for CR, because next spring, hopefully when we do our celebration, this anniversary is being postponed to this 2021. So it'll be I think someone used the word synergy. It'll be an interesting confluence of those two commemorations. So anyway, long public service announcement. Thank you, Alex. Great job. Oona's next with question 5.
Muted. Always forget to turn mute off. So yeah, to that end, I mean, with talking about origins and, you know, how that, you know, the alumni magazine was talking about, you know, like the origins of as PSU as an activist campus. One question we have is, just kind of what's one of the most important things about the origins of the conflict resolution program that you think would be most important for the PSU community, and I would say to the Portland community to know?
Well, I guess I'm thinking of a few things. I mean, one, I want to circle back to the last comment and question about activism. So, activism is not just taken to the streets, right? So I think teaching is a form of activism, right? So Bell Hooks writes about teaching to transgress. It's, one of her books. And so I want us to be clear that when we talk about activism, it's not just Tom because he's, on the streets and doing all that. I mean, all of us who are trying to change the world are activists in some way. We're just using different tools to do it. So I do think teaching is a form of activism. So back to the question you've posed, I think one of the important things is that, we made something of nothing. I mean, we, Rob in particular and Mary, had a vision, brought it to campus, found people to support it, and moved forward. And as I said, I was third one in the door, but they were already, in. And I think it was remarkable. And we lived for many years as a self-support program, which meant, whatever we made. Whatever we didn't, we didn't. And we had large numbers of students. We were speaking to a large constituency of people who were interested in this material. We found a way to really address, theory, research, and practice in this area. We were early enough in the field. As I said, we were the largest program on the West Coast for a while. I think maybe we were the only program on the West Coast. And we really did it by interfacing with a large aspect of the campus. Our entire, initial cohort of adjunct faculty, as I said, came from political science, came from anthropology, came from communications, came from philosophy, came from different dimensions. And we had to really insert ourselves in a way where, in a way, we were kind of a square peg in a round hole, right? We started very backwards from a lot of units, and there was good, bad, and ugly of that. But here we are. So I guess that's my answer.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so, well, to follow up with that, I guess I've been looking into a lot of the programs because I mean when Portland State's program was formed, it was a very I mean the field of conflict resolution and peace studies was very new, but we weren't the first. So I'm interested to know if how much communication there was with or if any, if there was with, there's some other universities out there that have similar programs. Like I know that some people were talking about in previous interviews about Kansas University. I think it's Kansas University has a program that's similar, and there's some other. Was there much communication between those programs, or people or any crossover, or?
Well, sure. I mean, at the time, again, there weren't that many programs. George Mason was the first. And, obviously we were in conversation with them. But, since we began, there have been many, many programs started. And in fact, we were instrumental in helping the University of Oregon launch their program. Mm-hmm. So, I actually still teach for them occasionally as an adjunct, but we were very core to their development. We had disciplinary faculty. Vandy, one of our faculty, comes from Notre Dame and Eastern Mennonite. Yeah, for sure. And at a number of years ago, when we went through a program review, we were certainly in conversation and looking at other programs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, Liza.
Yeah, hi. So before I get to the last question, which is kind of like our ending, I wanted to ask about your experience in Australia compared to the United States. So I assume you were doing conflict resolution for your PhD in Australia, right?
My PhD was in international conflict resolution, yes.
So what are some of the sort of differences or similarities? What's your opinion of between the two countries? Is it the same kind of issues that they deal with, or kind of what's your opinion of that?
Are you asking about the comparison of the academic programs, or are you asking about the social issues that the different countries are facing?
I would ask specifically more about the programs. What are the differences in the two programs between the two countries?
Well, Australia is the British system. So when I went to Australia, it was more heavily research-based. I went for a year and took 4 seminars, and then the rest was research-based. So it's very different than the US system, where you're doing number of years of coursework and comps and all those things. So it was both a blessing and a curse that I landed there. But it was more heavily research-based.
What kind of research were you doing?
I did my research in Israel and Palestine on collective memory and conflict resolution.
Interesting. That's cool. Okay, so I think the last question on our list is just sort of an open question. Is there anything else, a story, an accomplishment that you want to share that you already haven't touched on? Anything that's really important to you that you want us to know and to maybe include in our exhibit, etc.?
Well, I guess, as you know, history is important, and I think understanding the context of where things were when we started is important. Understanding that, we were often kind of seen as the bastard child on campus. I think there were programs that were threatened by us because they saw us coming in and just kind of doing our own thing and not being in the system, right? And that was both innovative and different. So I think really our development went from that to becoming more part of the system. And I think that's had its advantages and challenges, needless to say. I also think that maybe one of the things that is wishful thinking on my part is that the campus and the university would see the importance of what we bring to even life on campus. That there are all kinds of things that I think what we see, what we know, what we do can help on campus. And I think there are often missed opportunities there. So I guess that's what I would say.
I have one more question. Sorry. We've kind of talked about this with some of the other interviewees, and that is how we can make PSU a more inclusive campus. And I was just transcribing one of the interviews that I did, and we were talking about on campus there's sort of an air of everybody's there, but they're still kind of separated into different centers. And so anyway, that's kind of part of the conversation. So I wanted to ask what you think about, how we can make the campus more inclusive in the future.
So when you say inclusive, do you mean less siloed, or do you mean inclusive around diversity and equity and inclusion?
Both. less separated, so that we're all coming together more, and then also programs of inclusion and things like that.
Well, the silo phenomenon is unfortunately pretty endemic to higher education because of the way we're structured and systemic forces. So if we don't get any time to collaborate across departments or any benefit for departments to cross-list things, it's not likely to happen because people are busy. I mean, people are already overly busy. So the cross-pollination and the collaboration and the breaking down of silos, which, I share as a value, is something that will have to happen above and beyond people's already overburdened plates. So I think I've collaborated with different people on different departments, collaborative scholarship, collaborative projects, serve on committees where people from other departments are there. There are ways, but it's a big campus, and unless there's structural or systemic forces creating the conditions for that, I think it's going to be very difficult for individuals to do that. And as far as the larger question of equity and inclusion, I think we are, again, a microcosm in a larger world, needing to continue to work at it very intentionally, very deliberately, very consciously. We need practices that reflect our values. We need in leadership to be, naming and practicing the kinds of things that are going to create more inclusion. We need our hiring practices to be intentional. We need voices to be heard and represented. We need, even again, it's back to a cultural systemic issue. If we want to have more inclusive practices, what about a system that says the only scholarship that counts is if you're the first author? So it's those kinds of things that have to really be addressed at the systemic level, and we have to listen to each other, I guess would be the short answer.
Well, thank you so much for answering my questions, all of our questions.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Wonderful, thank you. I'd like to open up to Cleophas and Lady J. They've been just dedicated members of this history project, and they have great insight because they're actually CR students or former CR students. So happy to give some time to, I see Cleophas unmuted, so I'll just see if you got a question. Please go right ahead.
Well, it's good to see you talk about the systemic issues, but I think that's part of the problem is the systemic of it all. And, breaking down, we keep talking about it and having, consulting about it and all this, but we're not doing the breaking down of the systems that create these issues. Even as we were talking earlier about peace and violence and racism, there was a reporter in, I think it was St. Paul this morning. He was a CNN reporter and he was African American. And he ended up getting arrested, handcuffed and arrested because
I saw that.
He believed that he was a reporter, and then you have this thing at the park with this bird watcher just wants to, just abiding the rules and telling this lady to, leash her dog, which is a rule. And then she calls the police and almost says he was raping her to get the police to draw their guns on him. And, we just keep seeing these images, but what we're not seeing are the changes that need to come about to resolve these conflicts, but also to dismantle these systems that, that these police, even the idea that woman thought that she had the right, and she knew what she was doing. She lives in New York. She knew exactly what she was doing. But just to do that, because someone asked you to leash your dog, it's just ridiculous. And until we get to the, I think we have to talk about it to bring it about. We have to really in your face. It has to be in your face for change.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not change. It's they destroyed they didn't get change in St. Paul until they burned the police station down last night. It's like, is that what we have to do? We have to burn it all down so we can.
Sometimes.
I'm sorry, I've got my box. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just going to say sometimes we do, and sometimes people don't wake up until it's so much in their face, and people don't wake up until it costs them something. And, I think that the systemic issues, I think that the problems are at the micro and the macro, and the solutions have to be at the micro and the macro. So we need solutions that are systemic and work with the structures, but we also need people to be educated and listening and in dialogue and, you know, being made aware. And unfortunately, like we often see, the people who are most willing to do those things are the people least likely to need it, right? So the people most needing to have a bit of an awakening around this are not necessarily the ones who are going to come to the table. So, you know, it's bit by bit. And but this is where the relationship between, you know, activism and leadership have to come hand in hand, because either one alone is less likely to make the kind of change we're talking about.
Yeah, and I was talking to one of my friends, and it has to come from, leadership has to come from the top. And so
Yeah, of course.
with this administration that's not leading us, I don't know where the heck he's trying to lead us to, but it's not the straight and narrow. But it's like he's always adding vinegar to the wounds every day. And
Yeah.
it's hard to feel like this is our country, because you're seeing this. It's like the revolution is being televised, and it's like this ignorance is being televised, and
Right.
nobody's doing anything about it. And if they do something about it, you know, it's just,
Right.
you know, so many conflicts. Like the postal, he's refusing to finance the postal service.
Right.
That's
Well,
part
I
of
think what you're,
American.
so Cece, here's the core of conflict resolution. For many of us, as you say, it's hard for us to feel like this is our country. For others, hard as that might be for us to hold in our hearts, they're saying, finally, we have our country back.
I know.
Right? And this is the essence of our work, is how do we bridge that divide? How
It's
do we
crazy.
bridge that divide? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, yeah, it's building those bridges. How do we engage with those people that don't want to engage? They just
So
want.
can I ask a question that fits in here?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, we have 5 more minutes. Sure.
Okay, cool. So I heard your very eloquent comments about the micro and the macro, but I'm curious, and kind of with what Cece's saying, like, how do you see the meso being fit? Like, I think that that's what needs to be filled in, sort of in the structure. We can identify micro problems, we can identify macro problems, but defining what the meso solutions are is a lot more challenging, and everyone has their own angle of how they can come into it. So in particular, with sort of, since I'm, I guess, wrapping up the interview in the public history / CR element within an academic setting, I'm curious about what role, or I guess I should say, as a tenured member of faculty, what is your perspective on the role that academic prestige has in thwarting or lubricating, or anywhere on the spectrum, the effectiveness of the conflict resolution work?
Well, I think any of us need to use our privilege and power, in my opinion, for good, and certainly being a tenured faculty member is a privilege, and it gives me a fair bit of power. The irony is I didn't realize I didn't have it before, because I was as loudmouthed before I was tenured as I am now. So I guess I didn't realize the game I was in. I didn't realize the game I was in until I was already, I don't know, winning. I don't know. It was very bizarre. I think that concept of academic freedom was not even in my consciousness, which is, you know, why it's a miracle I'm still here. But yeah, I think we absolutely have to use our power. And academics, you know, academics are what's considered sort of track 2 diplomats, right? Track 1 is government and official level. You know, track 2 are citizen influentials, clergy and media and academics and community leaders, people who have maybe not official decision-making power, but have a lot of influence. And I think we have a lot of influence. We have a lot of influence when we speak. We have influence when we write. We have influence in the, you know, partnerships we develop. And I think it's very important to take a stand. And I think that's why you know, I guess in closing thoughts, you know, conflict resolution theoretically is a discipline where, you know, some people say we're supposed to be neutral, and I don't think we're able to be neutral. And I think we have to be conscious of our biases and conscious of our advocacy orientation, and acknowledge that our field is not a neutral field. We have values. We have values toward nonviolence. We have values toward communication. We have values toward equity. We have values implicit in our discipline that we are promoting. So we need to be really transparent about that, and articulate why, and use the pulpit we have. You know, I've gone through a few cycles of despair in my career about wondering if anything I do will ever make a difference. You know, after the talks broke down in Israel-Palestine, after Trump was elected, you know, right now, actually, in the face of just, you know, left and right, you know, violence against, you know, minorities. Not that it wasn't there, but it's certainly, at least in the public face, more because of social media. And so I think for me, the question isn't, is anything I do ever going to make a difference? It's, what can I do? And that may be focusing my impact on a fairly narrow sphere. Like, where can I impact? Because if I think I'm going to end racism, I'm going to go to sleep frustrated and weary every night. Right?
Yeah.
But if I know that I can speak up in this situation or that situation, I can feel agency. So I think that's the balance, is activating our agency without putting ourselves in such a level of frustration and fatigue.
So what I hear you saying is that the meso aspect is kind of just showing up where you are and living the experience through a peace-oriented lens of CR values.
Can you clarify how you're using the term meso?
Just as the sort of gray area between micro and macro.
Okay, I wasn't sure how you meant that. Well, I would say, first of all, I'm not sure they're micro and macro are distinct anyway, right? So they're kind of, they're really different reflections of the same orb. But yeah, I mean, I think every act is a political act, actually. So
it is.
The personal is political. Yeah.
This is wonderful. I want to be a little bit mindful of our time, and just thank everyone for wonderful probes, and Barb for a very compelling series of narrations. But just maybe the closing breath, from your point of view, and maybe with an example, because we love stories in public history. What does CR do for students? What is the student added value from your point of view with your years of experience? And again, an example would be lovely, but just if you had to sum it up.
Well, there are a million stories, right? I mean,
Of
of course, and the ones we know and the ones we don't know, but I'll tell one that I didn't know until way after the fact, right? And so this is where it's back to that question of, you actually don't know where you're having impact. So it means you have to act every moment in the direction that you want, not knowing whether or not there's going to be impact. So I had an international student in our program and in some of my classes from Taiwan. And in my psychology class, we had to do group projects and presentations as one of the assignments. And one group went, and they did a very nice job. And he was in a group later in the term, and he came up to me, and he was absolutely almost in a panic. I mean, he said he couldn't. I mean, part of it was language, right? His English wasn't native, and he was very insecure. And he said he was never going to be able to do that. He was never going to be able to get up in front of the class. He was never going to be able to do a good job. And he was really spinning out in a very serious way. And he was very isolated, right, as an international student, far from home. And only in retrospect now do I remember what I told him, because it came back to me much later, which is, I want you to go home, and who at home matters to you. And he identified his parents and his close friend. And I said, I just want you to call them and talk to them. Because for me, the essence of what I saw was his sense of disconnection. I knew he was perfectly capable of doing this project, but it was his sense of disconnection and his sense of isolation that was informing his anxiety and his fear. I completely forgot all about that. I barely even knew I had done it. He went on and he did his project. It was fine. A year and a half later, I got an email from one of my faculty colleagues, Rachel Cunliffe, who had been his thesis chair or project chair. And it turns out that that event was pivotal for him. And what he ended up doing was going to the Office of International Student Affairs and working with them on helping international students feel less isolated and disconnected. He did his entire master's project on that. He developed a whole program for them on that. He delivered a beautiful presentation for his master's degree. And this was because of something that I had done that I didn't even remember.
Well, I was there.
Yeah.
And that's Daiwan Hu.
Yeah.
I think I can say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if Rachel told you, but almost everyone in the room was in tears that day.
I didn't know that.
You and I have been here a long time. I've been to my share of master's defenses and presentations.
Yeah.
Almost everyone in the room was crying, including,
Yeah.
I don't think she'd mind if I told you that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's very moving for me and very gratifying. And I think to me, the core of this story is, again, take one action to make one person's moment better. You don't know where that's going to ripple. And to me, I might never have known that if Rachel hadn't circled back to tell me that. I wasn't in the room. So that was, her gift to me. But this is the mezzo. This is the mezzo. Because his world was changed. He went on to change the world at the university, which is going to have a ripple effect for other students. And there are plenty of things that I've done that may have had no impact. But all I'm saying is we don't know. So we have to act as if every moment is our opportunity to make somebody's world better.
What a lovely final thought. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. What a beautiful Friday you've given me. You've given me a gift today. Great job, everybody. Barb, thank you. Have a fabulous weekend. Students,
see the beautiful landscape. Thank you, everybody.
I'll be in touch with everybody. Thank you so much. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
Good job,
Thank you for your work.
Awesome.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.